When you choose to live in the countryside, away from the noise of the cities, the honking horns, the neighbors fighting over parking spaces, it's because you want peace. I chose that. I did everything right. I bought a property in a secluded corner of the state, an old farm where the only sounds were the rustling of the tall bushes and the quacking of my ducks. Yes, ducks. Lots of them. They weren't show ducks or champion breeders. They were just ducks. But they were mine. I had a name for almost all of them, and I swear to God, I've seen ducks that were smarter than many adults who have passed through my life. They knew their way around the henhouse, understood when it was time to eat, and even learned who was good and who wasn't. Spoiler, they hated that woman from day one. She arrived in a white SUV shining brighter than a politician's ego, honking her horn as if she'd lost her brakes. Within the first week, she had a fence installed to protect her property, even though the only thing separating it from my land was a small stream that dried up in the summer and returned shyly in the spring. Nobody there was in the habit of fencing anything off. People knew where their backyard was, and the natural fence was common sense. But then she came, and when it came, it brought with it the smell of expensive perfume with an essence of judgment. You know people who look at you like you're smelling a wet rag? That's what it was. At first, I thought she was just weird, the kind who does yoga at 5 in the morning and carries a bell in her bag to balance her energy. But it was just an illusion. It didn't take long to discover that she was the type who sends emails to the town hall because the color of someone else's chicken coop offends rural aesthetics. Then, one day, the ducks disappeared. It was early in the morning, and I went as usual to the back pond where they used to stay. I brought corn, as I did every day. I arrived with the bucket and didn't see a single beak. Not a single one. Just the echo of my own footsteps sinking into the mud. I thought it was a coyote, a nocturnal attack. I cried. I got angry. I started checking the fences, looking for feathers on the ground. And then, 3 hours later, I received a message on my cell phone from an acquaintance in the neighboring town. Your ducks are in the community pond. There were even children taking photos with them. The soul left the body. I went there. When I arrived, I felt like laughing and vomiting at the same time. They were all there. My ducks. Some swimming peacefully, others sunbathing on a rock, as if they were in a resort. And in the middle of a group of ladies, there she was, telling the story as if she had rescued victims from a shipwreck. They were trapped in a small space, with no freedom. I brought them here. Now they live in harmony, with space, with real nature. Trapped? Small? It was a 10-hectare property, woman. They had more freedom than a lot of home office workers. I got close and said, "Those are my ducks." And she replied with the lightness of someone talking about a supermarket plant. There's no such thing as a wild animal owner. They belong to the earth. I wanted to punch her in the face. But what I did was another kind of violence. Pure and refined, internal, silent. The kind that doesn't put you in jail, but gives you a taste. I went home. I planned. I sat on the veranda with a cup of coffee and a topographical map of my property. I saw every slope, every curve, every water outlet. And what I discovered was wonderful. The farm's old dam, built decades ago by a former owner who raised tilapia, was still there. A little cracked, but still standing. And guess what? Its ground was below. Literally. Geographically. Spiritually, too. But that's a detail. That dam held back a fair amount of water. It couldn't create a tsunami, but it could fill a good floodplain. And as the wise say, he who frees other people's ducks gets water from the courts on his doorstep. I'm not one to make a fuss. I'm not one to sue, shout, or make a fuss. I'm a problem solver, and I started to solve it. I did what anyone in my position would do with a tractor, a sledgehammer, and a soul full of anger. The dam had always been there, huge, ugly, made of stacked stone, dried clay, and some broken tiles that I don't even know how they lasted so long. I never touched it because I had no reason to. The water dammed there formed a kind of natural pool where only a few frogs dared to take a dip, but now it had a mission, and it would be a glorious one. First of all, I did my homework. I researched drainage, did some math, reviewed environmental laws, and even spoke to a retired civil engineer who lives nearby and has been bored ever since he lost his job for freaking out in a supermarket over the price of bananas. He loved the project. He said it was a poetic way of correcting topographical and moral imbalances. I started slowly. Nobody noticed. A little tractor here, a bag of earth there, a new ditch making its way through the trees. It looked like maintenance. Nothing much. Not even the curious locals passing by on their bicycles could have imagined it. And the further I went, the more I liked the idea. Because it wasn't just water that I was releasing. It was accumulated anger, wounded pride, and a gigantic amount of sarcasm. I didn't want to flood everything. It wasn't movie revenge. It was a natural correction. A slight but permanent adjustment. A daily reminder for her to think twice before she thinks she's the universal defender of ducks and rural morality. When the water started to run off, it wouldn't destroy anything, but it would turn my neighbor's land into a beautiful, constant marshland. It took me 3 weeks to tinker with everything, adjusting the flow, strengthening what I needed, weakening what I should. And the irony? I did it all with tools donated by the Residents Association itself, those that promote sustainable rural maintenance. It has never been so pleasant to follow community guidelines to do something completely out of control. On the day of liberation, I woke up before the sun. I had a leisurely coffee, put on my best plaid shirt, and backed the tractor into the exact spot where the dam's clay was most fragile. A little push. That was all. No explosions, no spectacle, just gravity doing its job, as it has done since the world was a world. The water came like a lazy yawn. First a little thread, timid, draining slowly. Then it became a dense, muddy, determined tongue. And when it passed through the second channel I had opened, it picked up speed. No destruction, no dramatic scenes, just a constant, peaceful, but non-negotiable flow. She didn't notice at first. Of course she didn't. She must have spent the morning reading and forwarding passive-aggressive emails to the neighborhood group. But by mid-afternoon, the ground around her house began to change. The grass became darker. The ground began to give way slightly. And suddenly, that ridiculous white picket fence she had had, painted universal peace white, began to topple over slowly, like someone surrendering. The woman freaked out. First she appeared in the yard in rubber boots, looking like she was going to fish for tilapia on the balcony. Then she started screaming, taking pictures, talking to herself, calling I don't know who. The HOA? Gone. The neighborhood president? On a trip. The environmental engineer she quoted so much? He lived in another state and didn't even know she existed. She tried digging trenches with a garden spade. She screamed at the earth, as if it were possible to convince the soil to recover immediately. Nobody helped. The most that happened was a lady next door offering a towel, and a boy on a bicycle stopped to watch, and just stood there, looking like he was watching the Discovery Channel live. By the end of the day, her house had become a kind of island. The garage was soaked, the lawn had turned into a swamp, and the ducks. Ah, the ducks. They came back. One by one, as if they had sniffed out the return of justice. They spent the afternoon swimming happily in the new swamp that surrounded the woman's house. It was comical. They seemed to be laughing. If this were a Disney movie, they'd even have songs. But what about her, trapped inside the house, calling some environmental emergency number that probably didn't even answer on weekends? That night, I had the best sleep of the year. The next day, I woke up to my cell phone buzzing with notifications. It wasn't because of the flooding, it was because of the photos. Someone, I don't know who, had taken a picture of the brand new marsh around her house and posted it on the city group with the caption, "New water attraction in the neighborhood." The post went viral in the little bubble of that community, where the most exciting thing was usually the arrival of the ice cream truck. The reactions were the best. People asked if it was a new containment pond. Others thought it was a modern landscaping project, and some even asked if it was part of an environmental revitalization program. I didn't say a word. I let the show run on its own. I only replied with duck emojis or photos of my pets floating happily in the neighbor's new pool. Meanwhile, she was freaking out. One day, she showed up at my gate all wet, with her boots up to her knees, holding a clipboard, as if that would give her some kind of divine authority. She started shouting that I had caused an ecological disaster, that she was going to denounce me to the city council, the state, the FBI, whoever. I didn't answer. I just looked at her, took a sip of my coffee, and asked, "You saw the ducks come back, didn't you?" The woman went white. It seemed as if her soul had evaporated. She turned her back and stomped away, sinking her rubber heels into the newly formed mud. She tried everything. She called a hydraulic engineer. The guy came, looked at the land, and said everything was fine. Technically, the water wasn't invading the house. It was just passing by. He suggested that she install a pump or perhaps build an elevation with stones. She was indignant. She said it wasn't fair. She didn't deserve to live surrounded by muddy water and feathered animals. The engineer, with the calm of someone who has dealt with a lot of crazy people, only replied, "Nature sometimes gives back." After that, she called the HOA. She tried to schedule an emergency meeting, claiming that she was the victim of a silent rural attack. Most of the members didn't show up. Two responded by saying they were too busy dealing with infiltrations of their own. Another said he was astral traveling. Yes, that's literally what he wrote. The meeting didn't take place. The woman had to face the swampy landscape of the new ecosystem that surrounded her on her own. She also tried a spiritual approach. One Saturday morning, I saw that she had hired a water feng shui consultant, a man in a beige robe, wooden necklaces, and the eyes of someone who had lived through 3 different incarnations. He walked around in circles, muttering things, pointing at the sky, the ground, and the garage wall. In the end, the diagnosis: the energy of the place was unbalanced by fluid oppressive forces. He charged $300. She paid it. And it got worse. Meanwhile, my ducks were thriving. I've never seen them so happy. They started nesting on the edges of the marsh, creating a kind of territory with little roosting and resting areas. It was as if they had been promoted. From the backyard, they went to the 5-star resort of the neighbor's house. And the funniest thing? They refused to leave. When I tried to call them back, they just looked at me like, "Leave it alone. It's better here." And I respected that. After all, who am I to interrupt a wildlife victory? The woman couldn't cope. She started walking around with an open umbrella. Even though no rain was forecast, she stepped on makeshift planks that she had spread around the yard as if she were living in a miserable version of Venice. She started stopping people in the street asking for help, saying that she was the target of water persecution. Nobody took it seriously. Most just shook their heads and walked away, pretending to receive an urgent call. There was a moment, I admit, when I almost felt sorry. Almost. It was a late afternoon when I saw her sitting on the balcony in a sweatshirt, holding a glass of cheap wine and staring at the ducks with an expression somewhere between despair and surrender. The sun reflected off the water surrounding the house like a glowing frame of humiliation, and I thought, has she understood? Did she finally realize that it's not because you think you're doing good that you can invade other people's worlds? Take what isn't yours. Decide what's right based only on what pleases your nose? But then she threw a stone at a duck, and the feather passed. The duck dodged elegantly, landed in the water with style, and moved on, as if to say, "You can try, but this pond is mine now." She gradually began to disappear. Not literally, of course. You could still see her figure passing by the window with a broom in her hand, as if she could sweep up water or chase away ducks with muttered threats. But the presence, That forced authority of someone who arrived thinking they could impose rules on other people's lives, disappeared with each week that the water remained there. There was a time when she tried to fight back. She sent emails to everybody. She tried the public defender's office, the city newspaper, even an environmental blogger who only talked about bees. No one took the bait. The most he got was a comment from an anonymous user saying, "Looks like wet karma." One day, a black car pulled up in front of her house. A guy in a suit, looking like a lawyer, or maybe a frustrated stockbroker. They spent hours talking in the yard, gesticulating, pointing at the water, the sky, the fallen fence. Then he left and never came back. After that day, she started packing boxes. The first thing that came out was the wooden plaque she had carved with the name of the property, Refuge of Harmony. A pretentious title for someone who threw other people's ducks in a pond and then yelled at the letter carrier because he wore a cap. Seeing that sign stuffed into the trunk of some car was the kind of small revenge that warms the chest like a fireplace in a cruel winter. In less than a week, she was gone for good. A moving truck took her furniture, her fake plants, her yoga mat, and that set of chairs that looked more like office decorations than home furnishings. She didn't say goodbye to anyone, of course. He didn't go to the bakery on the corner. He didn't say goodbye to the post office. He didn't even try to sell the trinkets. She simply disappeared. I heard from a neighbor that she had gone to live with a cousin in another state. She needed to reconnect with dry environments, she reportedly said. I don't even know if this is real, but it seemed appropriate. The woman couldn't stand the idea of living with humidity, whether on the ground or in the eyes of others. With the house abandoned, nature took over. The marsh became prettier, fuller, more alive. Frogs, dragonflies, and even some fish began to appear. Who knows how? Maybe some neighbor with a sense of humor threw it in there just to complete the ecosystem. I myself took a hammock and an old bench and started fishing on Sunday afternoons, right in front of her old balcony. The silence was delicious, only interrupted by the sound of ducks swimming as if they owned the place. And they did. The property was put up for sale at a ridiculously high price, in a desperate attempt by the family to regain some pride. It went on for months without a single interested party. After all, not everyone wants to buy a house surrounded by a makeshift swamp and inhabited by a gang of ducks who don't take orders. And when a buyer finally appeared, an artist, one of those hermits who find charm in things no one else wants, he had a wooden bridge installed to access the house. He painted everything yellow and hung up a sign saying, "Welcome to the Kingdom of the Ducks." I got an eccentric and, to my surprise, very pleasant neighbor. He talks to the birds, plants herbs that actually smell good, and doesn't try to rearrange nature based on condominium etiquette manuals. We got on well from the first good morning. In the end, no one ever spoke of the woman again. She became a legend. The neighborhood treated her like a passing storm, and maybe it was. A hurricane of arrogance that passed through, tried to take over everything, but ended up taking such a bath that it evaporated. The most ironic part? That dam I dismantled became a symbol of something bigger. A small adjustment to the landscape that changed the whole dynamic of that corner of the community. The water found its course, the ducks found freedom, and I found peace. Sometimes the best answers don't come in words. They come in silence, in mud, in open wings floating on a lake that didn't exist before, and which now, honestly, seems to have always been there, waiting for its time to be born. And she had to watch it all happen from her window, until she understood, too late, that when you throw someone's ducks into someone else's pond, the least that can happen is that the water comes knocking on your door. Don't forget to leave your like and comment below if you liked the video.